This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
The Chapel Probation podcast takes a critical look at evangelical colleges and universities, focusing initially on Azusa Pacific University, where I taught English for 15 years. I'm Scott Okamoto, and I'm writing a book about how I deconstructed from faith completely while at APU. This podcast, though, is my tribute to the students and other faculty who survived evangelical higher education. They faced ridiculous racism, sexism, anti-LGBTQ hatred, and all manner of bigotry. From the heartless evils of the prosperity gospel to the destructive pseudo-theology of purity culture, the stories will break your heart, but they will also inspire. These people faced bigotry and fought back. In a weird, kind of sick way, we went through some shit, but we formed identities and we formed communities through it all. I hope you will join us.
Hi, I'm Gail.
I'm Nate.
And this is Full Mutuality. Today's episode is a special episode because it's a bonus.
Special.
It's a bonus episode.
You say that with such, I hear sarcasm.
No, I'm sincere. I'm excited about this episode because we're going to give a chance to update you on some of the exciting things that have been going on behind the scenes. We just wanted to fill you in. We don't have a guest. It's just me and Nate sitting here, sipping some whiskey and just having some fun. We want to update you on what we've been up to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nate?
Yes, but before we give you updates, I mean, we've been podcasting, for 19 episodes now?
19 whole. The next episode will be our 20th episode. And we've got some really neat stuff coming up on our podcast. Yeah. Do you want to give some teasers?
Yeah, before we give any updates or anything.
Okay. All right, we'll save that. We'll put that off. We'll get you guys excited about what we're going to say later, but we'll leave that.
I think we can maybe reflect on the last 19 episodes. What were some things that we learned? What are some things we love about podcasting?
I'm so thankful for our audience. I'm thankful that there's actually people that listen to me and you having conversations. I don't think when we started this off, we expected to have the audience that we do. And we're really appreciative of all of you. We're appreciative of your support. If you're one of those kind souls that's left us a review, you don't know how much that means to the two of us. We just get on, we work to make this a labor of love for you guys. And when we read that, it makes a difference that, you're listening to us as you do your laundry or you're sitting in your car and something we said resonated with you. It means a lot to Nate and us to just sit and we'll read to each other the reviews that we get in. And we just want to say, we started this podcast. And if I'm going to look back at things, we started with talking about Mars Hill. And we started talking about Mark Driscoll. I think Christianity Today had put out their episode. They put out a podcast series on Mars Hill, 8 years after that whole thing blew up. And it took off. This was an important conversation on evangelicalism as a whole and what it looks like when it goes wrong. But it resonated with so many people who didn't go to Mars Hill because there's a lot of problems in evangelicalism currently. And I think a lot of people wanted to reflect on that situation in order to take from it what they will for their own situation. So it's still our most downloaded episode. And I don't know necessarily that it's related just because it's our first episode. I kind of think that people really had it on their heart to kind of unpack some of what happened and how it related to their own story. So it's still one of the things that gets a lot of draws. I will give a preview in here. We do have somebody who helped bring down Mars Hill coming up on one of our episodes.
Wait. We'll talk about this later.
Okay. That's my teaser. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But we will get back to Mars Hill. If that was something that you came in interested on Full Mutuality, we understand why that was an important topic. So we plan to get back to that. But we've kind of been going through our own journey of your church history, Nate. I mean, you grew up in a fundamentalist church and ended up at Bob Jones University, and then you ended up in some well-known churches like Hillsong. So we've had a lot of stories to cover along the way, just combing through our own stories. I haven't gotten too much into my own personal journey as much. I plan to in the future, maybe in upcoming episodes as a teaser. I hope to cover foster children I mean, we've covered a lot of ex-evangelical material, but I think on a personal level, that's something I hope to get into in the future. I hope. My foster brother said to me, he's Native and Indigenous in Canada. I live in Canada, and he's talked about how he's never been on a podcast. He's been asked by many people. He's a leader in his community. He's doing amazing things, and he said he'd be willing to pop his podcast cherry with us. So he said, "For you, Gail, I'll come. I'll sit with you." And so I hope that ends up happening. Even if I don't get to do that with him anytime soon, I've talked to some of my other foster siblings, and we hope to have another episode coming up soon discussing what it's like to be foster kids. We like to cover topics about being on the margins, not just ex-evangelical stuff, but we understand that's our background, ex-evangelical. Yeah. So we're covering a lot of that stuff in our podcast as we go, because it affects our life today. Like, I mean, it's definitely a part of the stuff we're still deconstructing.
Yeah.
What about you, Nate? How about what are your reflections looking back?
Yeah, I want to go back to some of the stuff you said about the impact that we're having on people. As far as something that I love is knowing that there are people out there who are gleaning from what we're doing. And I do want to read something that we've talked about in behind the scenes is reading some of the reviews that we get.
Are we going to read our nasty reviews, or are we going to read our nice ones?
Well, I think because I'll get to that, because I think the next thing I have on my notes is challenges, and so I think I put some of that into challenges. But as far as stuff that I've loved, some of the reviews we've gotten, like you were saying, we really do appreciate everybody who takes the time to write a review, and especially those who write friendly reviews.
We do. We get encouraged by that stuff. It's what keeps us going. Like we're not making a profit off this podcast. I know we've said that before, but I think it's important to know this is a labor of love from us, and we're excited about what we're doing because we want to reach and help support others who are in those situations. Right. But like reading those positive reviews, that's what fuels us. That's what keeps us going. That's what lets us know that what we're doing is making a difference, and keeps us going.
Yeah, we have a podcast. We have a review from Freddie Bell Moans.
Thank you,
on
Freddie.
Apple Podcasts. Yes, so thank you, Freddie Bell Moans. And they wrote, "Full mutuality shines a light on evangelicalism's darker sides that are often overlooked. We can't truly move forward as a society unless we are all held accountable, including the institutions we hold dear. Give it a listen. You won't regret it." If you're listening, you've already taken Freddie's advice. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.
I like this review, actually, from Times Alfredo of the Year, which sounds delicious. It is one of my favorite pasta sauces.
Yeah. As an Italian, I have no objections to any pastas, but Alfredo's lovely. Continue.
Yeah. So they titled this review, "Feels Like I'm Hearing from Clever, Safe Friends. The podcast hosts chat with brilliance and eloquence." I don't know about that. I'm not that eloquent. Yet with total welcome and acceptance. They're your smart friends in your living room who put words to the thoughts you had but couldn't articulate while you were leaving evangelicalism. Aw.
That's really touching. Yeah.
That was beautiful.
We hope to do that. Like the idea that like you feel like you're sitting in a living room with us. I mean, that's the beautiful thought of what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a sense of community. We want to be a support to you. We know, Nate and I both know what it's like to feel that loneliness and that emptiness and that, what it's like to break away from evangelicalism. And we do want you, if you've left that community and you've grown up in it, we hope that as you listen to us, it's a sense of comfort. And it's like you're sitting in our living room with us. And, we've gotten to meet different people we've podcasted with and it's fun. It's the relationships are like that, sitting around in the living room, kicking around and the community outside of evangelicalism exists. And that's what we're hoping to help facilitate, right? Like that's what we have on our hearts to do. So thank you so much for that review. It really paints a picture of what we have on our hearts and what we're hoping to accomplish. So.
And we actually got a message. So in addition to writing reviews, look, we also recognize that for many of you, you might not be in a safe place or might not feel comfortable putting thoughts out there publicly. Especially if you're inside of evangelicalism or fundamentalism, or if your livelihood depends on that structure. We get that it can be unsafe, risky, dangerous to put a public review out there, even if your name isn't attached to it, even if you put in like a pseudonym. But we did get so if you want to reach out to us just to shoot us a note, we love to hear from you. We did get a message. I'm not going to put the name in there, but they wrote, I just wanted to let you know that I'm enjoying the podcast. I found it through so-and-so's episode that they were actually friends with quite a few years ago. And this person said that they worked for that place before and after deconverting. They still have some personal and professional liability within the world of evangelicalism. So they're not very public, but they want us to know that it has been gratifying to hear familiar experiences voiced in the episodes of our podcasts. So, yeah.
Aww.
Thank you. That was.
If you want to send us an inbox, you do that. We'll read it. I mean, we'll try and do like what Nate just did. Try and disguise enough of the details that if we do read it publicly, we don't out you for anything. Mm-hmm. But we really appreciate those messages. They keep us totally encouraged. What have been the highlights for you, Nate? Aside from the messages, what have you enjoyed covering? What has been exciting you as we've been going through things?
Basically all of the stuff you said, but with some specificity, some of the friendships that we've developed over the time that we've been podcasting, some that have actually manifested in real life friends.
People we've met in person and chilled with.
Yeah. And some that are very likely to become real life friends.
I feel like we live in a day and age where we build online communities and then we end up with those really cool moments where we get to meet the people who've been a support to us through online. And I think that's totally new to our generation. Like it's something that didn't happen in the past. But I mean, you and I met online. Like that's how, and I mean, we're engaged now. We'll be married next year. But we met through an online community, and I feel like more and more people are. I mean, it used to be kind of a joke if you met someone online. They weren't real communities. It's not your in real life friends. But I feel like there's some really deep communities and friendships to be made online, and it's fun when you actually do get to meet in person and you get to hang out and realize. Actually, like you think, like you get all those warnings that when you see someone online, it's like a curated version of them. And it's scary when you meet them in person, they might be totally different. I don't know about you, but I find that like all of my meeting up with the people that I've gotten to know online has been fun, has been even better. Has like, yeah.
So that I think is true of dating apps. But
you're my exception. Meeting you in person was definitely.
Well, what I'm saying is,
are you saying I'm creepy?
No. What I'm saying is what you were saying about how like people's cautions about meeting somebody that you've met online, that they're it is a curated version of themselves. Yeah, I would agree that that's the case for dating apps, but in online community where you're meeting people through. Whether it's ex-evangelical circles, whether it's through ex-fundamentalist circles, ex-Mormon circles, basically survivor circles, survivor communities online. The person that you are meeting online is probably the more real version of that person than they would be in real life, because in a lot of cases they have to hide who they are in real life, but you're finding out more about their story and who they are and their struggles through online community. So that's what I
think that's precious about online stuff. I mean, we always hear about the concerns of social media and the fakeness and the algorithms and how it's, there's just so much downsides to it. But I think you're right. I think sometimes we get a chance to express some of the more real sides of us that in real life is a little bit more dangerous and we have to hide. I know like recently, not connected to our podcast, but I met someone from my survivors group that I've been a part of. I won't name the group, but somebody who I know is from California, and she traveled. She had a layover in Montreal, and we hung out, and I got to show around the city, and it was a beautiful hangout, catching up on life. But you're right, we've been sharing a lot of very real details of what it's like to go through a divorce and to support each other through those situations. And I feel like, the ex-evangelical community, if you've made it out of being evangelical and you're now in the ex-evangelical community, you've gone through a lot. You've had some really big experiences to make it there and to survive that. And it's kind of fun when you get to meet in person and meet the people who've done that kind of work, who've had that kind of bravery and courage. And I agree with you. The friendships that we've made have been a lot of fun in real life. Yeah. So
last on our little reflecting section of today's episode, I guess instead of reflecting, let's look ahead. What are some things that we're looking forward to?
Ooh, what are we looking forward to? I mean, I'm excited to like share the episodes that we've already recorded. Sometimes we're a little bit behind in what we have coming up, and we've recorded something.
Always. So we're not behind, we're ahead.
We're always ahead. We always have like a few in the bag that we're ready to release, and it takes us a little while to do all the editing. Podcasting is a lot of editing. I think that's what discourages a lot of people with podcasting is like you sit, you have great conversations, and then taking the work to edit, it takes a while to churn out stuff. So, I mean, we drop everything right away, but we got to do the editing. So we've got a few episodes coming up that we're excited about.
There are some podcasters who don't bother to edit.
Oh, Nate is definitely, he's a techie between the two of us. In case any of you guys think we're doing a good job, I want to give the credit to Nate. He's the producer. Not that I do try and sit with him while he's doing his editing so he doesn't feel alone. That's my contribution to him.
It's great bonding time for us.
I sit in the background and I listen.
Instead of going on midweek dates, we edit a podcast together.
This is how we're holding up long distance dating together.
Yeah.
While we're engaged, we're doing podcast editing. But yeah, like it's there's a lot of work. I thank you, Nate. Thank you, babe, for all the work that you're putting into all the editing.
You're welcome.
And are we going to preview some of our guests? Should we throw out some of the exciting stuff?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the upcoming episodes. But I also want later on, I want to preview some ideas that are still germinating that we haven't really put any sort of concreteness
stuff we'd like to do. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But let's go ahead. Maybe we can talk about some of the episodes.
Some of the guests. So we've stuck to guests that are, in general, connected tangentially through our stories. I mean, Scott, who, if you listen to our last episode, I got to give a plug to Scott. I really do, because Scott is...
We'll talk about Scott a little bit later.
Okay.
But yeah.
Put Scott on pause.
But
okay.
Yeah, but go ahead and give your quick little shout out, but make it real quick because I do want to talk about him a little bit in the next little section.
All right. We have a reason to bring Scott up later. But yeah, we've had Scott is maybe one of this and really quick version of this connected to us, not necessarily through our experience. We just kind of had to stumble along his stuff. And so we had him as a guest on our last episode, if you listened. But a lot of our guests so far have actually been people we know in person and have been people that we have made connections with because we attended the same church as them, or they're people that we know that we've actually met that connect to our own stories. And I think that's fun. I mean, maybe we'll become one of those podcasts that gets the famous people in and that, everyone has on their podcast. And sometimes those guests are totally worth having. And we're going to bring one up soon that we're very excited is coming on. But we haven't done that so far. Yeah, two.
Well, we have had one.
Who do we have?
This is where I was talking about how we've made an in real life friend. And you've heard her on the podcast twice and she's coming back. We'll talk about that later. But Janice Legata is sort of the one. Right. Although
you
I
went
guess
to church with her. That's why I was including her in how they connect to our stories, because you and Janice both went to Hillsong NYC together and you were both there at the same time. I mean, she knew of your brother more than you because of your brother's position in the church.
She was Manhattan. He was Manhattan. Yeah. My brother was much more high profile than I was.
But, yeah. But like you guys knew a lot of the same people and you were definitely working within the same organization close to the same time period. So there's much more of a connection there than just calling in someone because we've listened to a lot of their stuff. But on that note, if we have someone on who we have no connection to at all, that's where that person has really been someone on our radar that's made a huge difference on our deconstruction, who's had a big impact on us, who we've been following their stuff for a while. We really, I guess, find it of like such a good quality. Like we're not just chasing down popular names to have them on our podcast, but every once in a while we're like, oh man, if this person agreed to come on our podcast, we would be thrilled to have them. And so I guess if we're going to brag about future guests, I have to brag. I'm really thankful. I'm really appreciative that Jo Lumen is coming on. We will be having an episode with her coming up on our podcast, and we are excited to have her because she just does a lot of really good stuff in terms of helping people with the concept of deconstruction and decolonization. She has a lot of really important stuff to say. And she's always interesting to listen to. She's always really engaging. She just has a lot on her mind.
If you're not familiar with Jo Lumen, which by now, if you're well, not by now.
If you're in these spaces.
If you're in these spaces, she is certainly someone that you should be following. Her content is fantastic. The best place to find her content are certainly Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I don't really follow TikTok very closely. I've rarely
actually come
the app,
across most of her stuff on Facebook. That's where I follow Jo.
Oh, Facebook. Oh, okay. I didn't realize
Yeah.
she was super active on Facebook. I found her. I follow her on Instagram and Twitter.
I'm not on Twitter much, but I'm on Facebook a lot, so I see her stuff there.
Yeah, her content is fantastic. So we are extremely grateful and honored to be able to say that we have Jo Lumen as a guest on our podcast.
Yeah. She has so much patience and grace with people. Like, I hope she didn't need too much of it with us, but I've listened to her like she's gotten into Twitter fights with some really ignorant, kind of arrogant white people, and she's been willing to go on their podcast, and I've listened to her take the time to break things down, and she's just got, I don't know, I aspire to have that kind of patience and grace and kindness to navigate those kind of discussions without just blowing up in anger at people for saying really annoying things. I kind of can get very judgy and frustrated fast. So yeah. I just find like listening, like me and you were listening to one of those and we had to keep pausing so that we could rant, just the two of us personally, because we were just like, wow, how did he say that without hearing himself? But I think that's why it's such important work, is because she is reaching a lot of people in the evangelical environment who are totally oblivious and unaware of the harm of what they're saying. Yeah. And she'll take the time to break it down and work through it with them. So I'm glad she's coming. She's she'll be on a future episode of Full Mutuality. Mm-hmm. And what about other guests? Do we have some other ones that you want to?
Yeah, we have. So speaking of Mars Hill Church, go back to the beginning of the podcast.
What you wanted to get to, yeah.
So if you're familiar with the Mars Hill Church story, which not to steal too much thunder from the episode itself when it comes out, but if you're familiar with the Mars Hill Church story and Mark Driscoll's downfall and like exit from Mars Hill, you'll know that part of the one of the big reasons for his downfall was when a number of posts that he put in an online forum went public and were connected to him, because he posted them under a pseudonym. And
he posted them to, I think, his church group blog.
Yeah,
thing
but I think it
whatever.
was... Yeah, I think if I remember the conversation correctly, the forum wasn't actually like a private church forum at the time, but he was posting under a pseudonym, I think William Wallace II. So
it was kind of known to his church that was him, I think, at the time.
Well, I don't think it was known to his church that was him. Otherwise, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't really recall the conversation that vividly, but in any case, once it was sort of the connection was made, or maybe he did write in his book that he had written under the pseudonym William Wallace II. I think I remember seeing that when I read his book years ago. But there was a series of posts that he made to this forum that kind of blew the lid on just the abusiveness of his character. So anyway,
as time went on, I think Mars Hill tried to take down all this stuff as they got really big and blew up.
So anyway, I don't want to go into the story too much because the story is in the podcast episode.
It's very juicy.
But we have an upcoming episode with the guy who leaked the post series that the church was trying to cover up, or I guess Mark Driscoll was trying to cover up, that showed just how that kind of pulled the curtain back on just how abusive Mark Driscoll really was. And so his name is Zach Malm. He also has his own podcast, which is I think an excellent podcast as well.
Yeah, he co-hosts it.
Culture Wars.
That's right. He co-hosts Veterans of Culture War. And I said it on that episode, but I'll say it as a preview. I try not to listen to too many male podcasters, because I feel like in my evangelical world, it was just flooded with just hearing white men talk. And that's something that on Full Mutuality, we've tried to avoid doing too much of. Like, we have white men who are gay or who are in marginalized communities, but we're trying not to just, have just white guys as our features. And Zach is doing really good stuff. He's one of those exceptions for me. I thought, as I was listening to his podcast, he also highlights a lot of people and voices that don't get heard within evangelicalism. Yeah. So I'd been listening to his pod. It was one of my exceptions of listening to a white man podcast, but I'd been listening to some of his episodes, and they were really helpful. So I'm excited to feature that one on how he starts off his podcast on how he destroyed Mars Hill. He took down a mega church, but like it's going to be an interesting episode, kind of diving into his story and his part in that.
And in addition, we also have Janice Legata coming back, because
our first return guest.
Yeah. She's become such a good friend of ours, and it's great to have that connection And she's a fantastic person to talk to. So
yes,
yeah,
that's where I was going to go.
Back.
I wanted to just give a shout out to Janice because there are people where you listen to them online and you're hearing their voice and you're like, oh, they just sound like a really cool person. They sound really grounded, down to earth. Or you hear that about a celebrity. I don't want to compare podcasters to celebrities. I hope none of us are. But just people you don't really know, right? That sound a certain way that you can perceive to be a certain way, and then you meet them in person and it's totally different. At least from our experience, Janice in person is a really nice human being, and we've met her more than once and we've hung out with her, and she's just as lovely or more lovely in real life than what, like, you listen to her on our podcast and you're like, wow, she sounds like a really nice, thoughtful, grounded human being, hilarious. In real life, same.
She's all of those things.
All of those and more.
Yeah.
She's a lovely human being, and she's been so supportive of us and what we're doing. And I like that about the podcaster community, at least the ones I've met in the evangelical community. It's been so nice to see that sort of camaraderie and community. There's not like a competitive viciousness, I find. There's very much love what you're doing. Thank you for speaking on this. And she's just been doing that for us in the background. She's just been cheering us on. We've been like, oh, I love that episode you did on. We listen to each other's stuff, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of listening to each other. There's a lot of hearing each other and appreciating the voices. Like, there's not one voice, right? We all have our different stories, and we're all doing slightly different work, but along the same lines. And it's encouraging. It's really encouraging. Janice has been so lovely to us and so supportive, and just had to give her a big shout out. If you don't have any, we're talking about white men, but I think there needs to be more listening to Black women. I think they have a lot that we need to be listening to, and she does a phenomenal job of highlighting. I mean, as a Black woman, obviously, but I mean, even bringing those voices onto her show and having I feel like as a white person, sometimes I'm listening into a private conversation that I normally wouldn't have a chance to sit in on in real life. Like, it'll be her and her friends just shooting it like from the hip, just speaking their heart, as a few Black women just sitting together having a conversation. And what a gift to just open that up and allow us to kind of sit and reflect on those perspectives that in our society often get totally erased and don't get heard. Yeah. I'm really appreciative of the work that she's doing. And
so, speaking of like collaborating with other, like-minded podcasters in this sort of, ex-evangelical, ex-Christian, whatever you're coming out of, people who are deconstructing and then also doing the work of decolonizing their faith, which we'll go into that in a little more detail in our episode with Joe. But we have developed a network we connected with, and we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but I want to give a little bit more detail and flesh it out a little bit more for you all.
All right, Nate. So you had this idea of Dauntless Media, or how did this come about?
Okay, so I separately had wanted to, just had this idea of some sort of collaboratory or network of podcasters. And I know that Irreverent Media Group exists. I'm not trying to recreate what they're doing. But I think there is something to be said for when you're creating content like ours, it can become challenging, which was actually something we didn't go into too many talk about the challenges in our previous section about reflecting on our podcast. But one of the challenges is that when you leave an in-group, especially one like evangelicalism, there will be people who find you who are angry that you.
What happened to you, Nate? I thought you were a Christian. How did they hurt you? What did they do to you to turn you into this bitter, terrible person? Sometimes I see you looking through those messages and sending me screenshots of the kind of more cruel version of, we read our nice reviews, but we get the opposite. We do get the people who knew us from our past who are just horrified that we've...
Yeah, or even people who didn't know us and who stumble on our podcast. You were mentioning our first episode where we were talking about Christianity Today's podcast about Mars Hill, and the responses
critical.
That we got... Yeah, we got positive responses to it, but we also got quite a few critical responses as well. And often from people who... And I don't want to shit on anybody's journeys, because we're all on different legs of a journey through kind of discovering what we believe and what our faith looks like. But I think what we did in that episode was point out things that a lot of people weren't ready to hear, or just straight up disagreed with, which is fine. You can disagree with us. But
Some
I think one of the challenges
are comfortable in their evangelical faith, and we're listening to the Christianity Today podcast, wanting to stay within that. And we were kind of challenging them investigating this kind of a story as part of that system.
So all that to say, it can get frustrating and a little bit lonely. You start to think like you're not. Maybe you're the only one with these ideas. Maybe you're the only one who's experiencing this kind of backlash. When that's not true, cognitively, we know that we're not the only ones that are, hitting these walls and facing this kind of backlash. We're not the only ones with these ideas or noticing these things about the places that we're coming out of. And not only the places we're coming out of, but even within the deconstruction space, we're finding things that look an awful lot like the world that we exited, and that can be frustrating. And I think what I've wanted to do was find other people who are seeing the same things that we're seeing, and that we can link arms and work together. Mm-hmm. And that just so happened that one of our online friends that we actually didn't even really know all that well at the time. I think, Gail, you had conversed with her off and on a little bit on Facebook, but Jessica Goforth, who is one of the co-hosts of the Leaving the Village podcast, we reached out to her initially just to have her come on the podcast and talk about her experience in ATI and IBLP.
We were listening to a bit of her podcast as a friend of hers, through social media. And I was like, Nate, you should check out this episode. Listen to this one Jessica did. And it was some really helpful, interesting stuff on leaving a cult, the cult of ATI. Mm-hmm. But I mean, within the broader context of a lot of evangelical teaching that we could relate to. Even though we weren't in IBLP or ATI, but we were like, oh. And yeah, you're right. I befriended her on Facebook before she started podcasting, before I started podcasting. Her and I have a lot of similar journey just in terms of where we're at in life, at our age, gone through divorce, kids, like the whole leaving evangelicalism around. Like it feels like a little bit of a twin journey. So me and her had actually been, before podcasting, just supporting each other, appreciating each other's comments on social media and writing responses and liking and reaching out to. I have just Facebook messages back and forth between the two of us before we ever started podcasting. And once she did, we were like, hey, you want to come on our podcast and share a bit of your journey? And so she did, and we appreciated that. And then from there, want to continue?
Yeah,
on?
and then we kind of developed this friendship that is, for all intents and purposes, an in real life friendship, even though we haven't met in real life.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. I hope she's a hugger, because you and I are going to be giving her a pretty big hug when we meet her.
Yep.
But she had been, and she and her co-host, Kathleen Reynolds, had been also kind of conversing about that very sort of thing of creating some kind of collaboratory where they could create new podcasts and bring in other podcasts.
You and her both had it on your mind to start a podcast network, but both of you individually were thinking of this on your own.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then we just for some reason, I don't even remember how it came about, but we ended up in a conversation about it. And next thing you know, we're all sitting down talking about this thing that we ended up calling the Dauntless Media Collective. And yeah, so that's the story of how the Dauntless Media Collective came about. So you've been hearing at the start of every episode, our little audio logo. You've been hearing some of the ads from our other podcasts.
You might start to hear more and more as we go along.
Exactly. So I want to talk about some of the why behind it. So one of the things that so one of the things that I want to do is collaborate with other, like-minded podcasters who are in this kind of space, creating content for ex-evangelicals, ex-Mormons, ex-Catholics, other cult survivors. And then also, I want to share listeners with other podcasts and vice versa. Selfishly, we want to boost our listenership, but also we want to provide you with opportunities to find other podcasts that might resonate with you in a specific way. So maybe you're listening to our podcast and you hear an episode about ATI, well, Leaving the Village is sort of the perfect podcast for you to listen to. Or maybe you have an experience in conservative evangelical higher education. Well, Chapel Probation is the podcast for you to listen to.
Are we going to get into Chapel Probation?
Yes. So we talked a little bit about Scott Okamoto, who is the host of the Chapel Probation podcast. And Scott, I mean, we just go listen to our last episode. You know, you'll get to hear Scott. He is fantastic.
I just want to give a quick thought on Scott. I feel like Scott is one of those people. He announced that he was 52 on our podcast. I don't know what his age was, but he acknowledged it. So he's like, he's about a little over 10 years older than I am. But I just felt like listening to him and talking with Scott, because we've had a lot of conversations with him, not on our podcast. And he's joined our Dauntless Media Collective, which I'm thrilled about. But Scott seems like, those teachers when you were in high school or elementary school or college that were like, even though they're teachers, they're not your peers, they just resonate with all the peers. They just know how to connect with everyone around them, and they're your favorite teachers. Because
and not like in a weird, creepy way.
No,
like they're trying
not like
too
they're trying too hard. No, they're chill people in real life. That's just who they are. They know how to make people laugh. They know how to put people at ease. They know how to connect. They know how to make people around them feel safe and recognized and seen. That's Scott. That is completely Scott. I mean, you'll hear us if you listen to the last episode. I start giggling at a lot of Scott's little jokes that he makes, but he just knows how to. Yeah, he's just one of those. I'm sure, I understand why his students are on his podcast giving their stories, because he is one of those teachers that after they left, they appreciated him, and he gives a lot of insight, and that's what he's been working on his podcast. Has been covering that angle of what it's like to go to Christian colleges. What it's like to do higher ed at an evangelical college. And I mean, on our podcast, we've talked about that from your angle at Bob Jones, and we've had other people discuss that, talk about their Bob Jones experience. And his is not Bob Jones, but I think on his second season, he plans to cover other universities aside from the one he taught at APU, which is what he covers in his first season. But sharing those stories, I think, is very relatable, whether you're at Bob Jones, whether you're at APU, whether it's another evangelical university. If you went through a Christian college experience, I think it's going to be one of those shows. It's one of those podcasts that really specifies. It kind of narrows in on that thing. It gets into what it's like to go to Christian higher ed. Yeah. It honestly is probably one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And Scott's just so funny.
Yeah.
It's great sense of humor.
So go listen to Chapel Probation with Scott Okamoto. We do have a couple of other podcasts that we are in conversation with who are very likely going to be...
Or not dropping names yet, right?
Joining the net. Yeah. No,
not yet.
Not yet. They have said yes, but I want to have all our ducks in a row. I want to get everything squared away. Follow our social media or the Dauntless social media, and you can find it at Dauntless FM, and you'll get updates when those podcasts are officially a part of the collective. But another facet of the Dauntless Media Collective that I think is it's kind of my little nerd out thing. One of my
your little
nerd
creative
out
outlet.
Yeah, but we have a Discord server for the Dauntless Media Collective.
Is it open to everyone?
It is. It's open to everyone. So basically, what it is it's a safe place for ex-evangelicals, ex-Catholics, ex-Christians, ex-Mormons, anyone who is either a cult survivor or somebody coming out of a traditional religious background who is doing the work of deconstructing and decolonizing their faith tradition. And it's just kind of a place to network, to support each other, to learn from each other, journey together through whatever things come about, whether collectively or individually, that you feel like you need other people who might understand your journey to talk to. And since it's Discord, it's not like a public forum where everybody can see your posts, because often when you post something on Facebook or you get into a conversation on Twitter, other people might show up and hijack the conversation. So that's what's great about Discord. I mean, in a way, Facebook groups are sort of like that as well, but Discord is just fun because you can keep things organized. You have, voice chat lounges if you want to sit and hang out in a voice chat or video call people. You can keep your chats sort of organized. If you're not familiar with Discord, you can keep chats kind of organized to topics. So that's what, that's kind of in the weeds with it. But
I wanted to add in Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you happen to also be like a podcaster or, other kind of content creator, we do have some resources that will be available in the server. Or if you want to share some of your own, experiences or expertise along the way with other folks who are creating content, we'll have a lot of that in the server as well. Scott and myself, we're both sort of audio production nerds. He's, an actual music producer. So we're everybody's happy to kind of share tips and tricks. So
That's
if you are a
content
content creator,
say.
it's a good place for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if you're not a part of our Dauntless network, and not everyone who wants to jump into the Discord server is necessarily a part of our network, but we want you, if you're a podcaster out there starting out and you just want support, you don't have to be part of our network to receive support. Nate and Scott are always happy to jump in. There's like a tech talk section. And you guys love nerding out on tech, both of you. What are you using? I have no idea. When they get into this, I kind of tune out. I kind of fade into the background, like, that's not my domain. But like, for those of you who love nerding out on tech stuff, you will get that kind of support for people that will be willing to support and help you figure out stuff on the podcasting side of things. So if you want to join the Discord, that's definitely a channel to receive that kind of support.
Exactly. So, if you're needing kind of a place to vent about the conservative faith that you came from, if you're looking for resources or other people to kind of journey along with, you are perfect for our Discord server. We'll put the link in the show notes. I'll probably put it up on the website or on the Dauntless website. Oh, by the way, the Dauntless website is dauntless.fm. So I'll obviously put that in the show notes as well. So you can.
The Discord server is still pretty small. So if you've ever been in a Discord server that's overwhelmingly big, where you your notifications blow up and you have to put it on mute because it's just it's going to make you dizzy. This is not that. Small community. So if you just want to actually have people that could respond to you before it disappears, this is where you want to go. Yeah.
Yes. And if you have great, ex-evangelical or ex-Christian memes, please share those. I should make a channel just for memes. That's what I should do.
I think you should.
I'll make a channel just to put,
It's therapy. That's how we cope.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Next point of conversation.
What's our next point, Nate? What do you have? What is next?
I've got the Patreon. So,
shout out to our producer.
Shout out to our partners on Patreon. You are basically producers of our show.
Yes.
So we have a new patron to announce
from Australia, if I'm not mistaken.
From Australia.
I love that our podcast. I feel a little underrepresented as a Canadian because I know our American audience on your side is so much bigger. But I feel like when we're covering ex-evangelicalism, that makes sense because evangelicalism is so much bigger of an issue in the U.S. Canada has a much smaller evangelical per capita rate than the U.S. So that makes sense that we're not bringing in as many Canadians. Although I do, if you were Canadian.
But Canada is the second largest, listenership of our podcast.
It is. I don't want to poo-poo on our Canadian listeners. Thank you. Thank you, Oh Canada, with me. Thank you, my Canadian supporters who understand where I'm coming from. We do want to support you, especially, I don't know, I really feel for the evangelicals in Canada because it's a totally different landscape. And I understand where you're coming from because that's my background. Yeah. So, but we actually do have some Aussie listeners. I'm wondering if it's because we've been covering Hillsong. Maybe not. But definitely that's your connection. So I think that might be some of the connection there.
Yeah. So I do want to shout out our newest patron, Never Odd or Even.
Thank you.
It's fun. That's a palindrome. If you didn't notice,
Nate
Never
is a
Odd
grammar
or Even
nerd. Nate loves these kind of things. Yes, he would tell you what I don't know what a palindrome is, but Nate would know.
So a palindrome is a word that
Here you go, guys. You're getting insight into how Nate's brain works. This is the conversations behind the podcast normally that you guys don't get privy to. How Nate will have conversations with me, and now you guys are getting insight into how we talk. Go ahead, babe. Explain.
Yeah, so a palindrome is a word that is spelled the same, not just a word or a phrase that is spelled the same forwards as it is backwards. So never odd or even is a palindrome.
It's spelled the same if you reverse that?
Never odd or even is never odd or even backwards. Yeah. Yeah.
And now you know what a palindrome is if you're not a grammar nerd like Nate. You're like me. You're like, what the heck is a palindrome? Now you can sound smart to people.
Yes, so thank you for your support, Never Odd or Even.
We appreciate it.
And we've messaged or commented a little bit back and forth on the Patreon page. So yeah. Oh, so speaking of Patreon, we had our first live podcast recording session that we made available to
with Joe.
Our patrons. Yes, it was our episode with Joe, which will be dropping soon. But we
that's some of the perks,
made the
guys.
live.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about our recording platform that we use is that we can do a live show that also has a call-in feature. So actually,
we have a call-in? We did have Scott called
Scott
in.
stuck around long enough to call in at the end of the show. So if you want to take
Adding
part in
his
any of
sass.
that,
Scott the
yes.
sassy one.
if you want to take part in any of that, definitely sign up for the Patreon. We'll also have some other perks available, posts specially tailor-made for our patrons.
And we don't have like these tiers. It's like if you're a patron, you get access to everything. It's not like we have all this hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like
If
you got to
you're a
give
partner-
$20 and then you get this amount. You put 100 and then
Right.
no. We're like you
Yeah,
give
no
us
matter-
the bare
no matter,
minimum. No matter who you are,
no matter like
what you give.
like if you give it $5 a month, you get access to everything, and that's it. There's nothing
have
more
tiers.
than that.
We just
Yeah,
appreciate
'cause-
the help.
Yeah.
Giving whatever you can.
I don't want to create like a class system based on people's ability to give. And ultimately, look, you work full time, I work full time. We're not relying on the podcast for our
No, this is
income.
not our revenue.
No, but it does. Making this podcast does take money out of our pocket, so it's nice to be able to put some of that money back in.
If
so
it
wanna
puts you at ease, we give more than we receive. And we're not pocketing that. We're not making that kind of podcast where we're raking in anything. So we appreciate that you're supporting what we're doing. If you're enjoying what we're doing and you want to support that, that's what it's going towards. We want to be transparent about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think the last thing I want to talk about is just some ideas going forward.
What do you want to do, Nate? What do you see us doing coming up?
So before we get there though, we've got a few more episodes like we talked about, and then
we're going to take a little break. We're going to close the season out.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll close out the season. We'll take a little break. And we're going to start working on upcoming seasons.
I'll say this. Nate and I keep talking about taking a break between the two of us off this podcast, and then we keep inviting more guests to come on, and we're just so excited by what we're doing that we never end up taking. We will eventually take a break, but we plan to for a bit, and we just keep inviting people because we love what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. So, after a break, we'll come back and we've got some ideas. None of them are like set in stone or anything. But we have some ideas for like a couple mini series sorts of things. I've been getting some messages from people from my past in evangelicalism who keep asking like, what happened to you? Why are you the way you are now?
What happened to you, Nate? What's wrong with you, dude?
That's not exactly what they're saying, but essentially to that effect. And I feel like maybe it would be great if I could, rather than, send a message back with this, long story about, how I arrived at this point and where my trajectory is. I think maybe it's good to have those conversations with others who have also left, whether it's evangelicalism or fundamentalism or whatever branch of faith that you've left. And we're going to share some of those stories. We have some friends who I think would be phenomenal to share their stories, and I think I would love to have them share their stories with you. So
we've been doing a little bit of that so far, like people coming out of evangelicalism sharing their story, but we want to maybe put a little bit more of an emphasis on it, maybe even expand it out a bit, like outside of, I had a friend who is an ex-evangelical person, came out of evangelicalism, but she was talking to me about how the ex-Mormon community often gets left out, and they have a lot they have some differences, but they actually share a lot in common with the ex-evangelical community. I know I've met a lot of ex-Mormons where we start, exchanging, sit around. We've done this with friends, you and I, people we know in real life. We've sat around exchanging stories, and we want to expand out because we know that some of our experiences are a little wider than just
So I think this will be like a little sort of mini series that we'll do, and we'll spread it out across one of our upcoming seasons, where we'll talk about just have people talk about why they left. I think we have shared some stories about people who have left, but I think it's great to have that perspective of why, because not all of us left for the same reason. We all have different reasons, different stories, different things that pushed us out, and 99.999% of the time, it is not for the reasons that most people who are still in those faith environments think.
Why they assume you left because of street cred or sexy appeal or I don't know. There's some really dumb blog posts that have been written about why people leave evangelicalism and
sermons too.
Yeah, and I think Nate and I have had this conversation behind the scene. And we'll probably get into it if we do a mini-series on this. But like, what are the perceptions we had on why people left evangelical? Like, what did we think back then too? Like, those are really important questions too, because while we were in it, we saw people leave and we had wrong assumptions, and we kind of want to clear the air for those asking. So
I don't
want to.
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail because we don't really have much detail.
We don't have written down what we're going to be doing. Plan yet. We're still rough drafting this.
No. Right. And another idea that we're kind of germinating a little bit is something that I sort of popped into my head of like, a cult survivor's handbook. And I'm sure that title of something exists out there, in this day and age. I'm sure that's out there. I haven't Googled yet, but even if it already exists, we'll do something like that on our podcast. And, we might even bring in a guest host for those episodes to talk about.
Sorry, speaking of, we mentioned bringing back our first guest, Janice, to kicking off bringing back a guest. The episode will be about is evangelicalism a cult? So speaking of Cult Survivor's Handbook, we're kind of starting to touch on that. It's going to come up, but if we do a mini series on a Cult Survivor's Handbook, it might be worthwhile even just starting with our first return guest, Janice, and we're going to be talking about how evangelicalism ties into that, and then taking you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. These are just some ideas that we have kind of in the works. So and if any of you have stories that you want to share, send us a note. On our website, fullmutuality.com. You can send us a message there. If you feel comfortable sending a voice message,
do they have that option on the Full Mutuality website?
Yep,
there's a little microphone or something they can click on and record a message.
There's a little feature on the website where you can, send a voice message. It's there on the right side. It's a little pink button. It says send a voice message.
Ooh.
So, So I think that's all I have. I don't know if you have anything else.
I'm just excited. I'm enjoying what we're doing. We have a lot going on in our personal lives coming up. We have a wedding to plan, a move to plan, lots of big things happening for the two of us personally. But I'm really enjoying in our relationship that podcasting is part of it. I've really enjoyed being able to podcast with my fiance, who happens to be my best friend. I love that me and him behind the scenes have a lot of these conversations, and then we're like, "Ooh, we should do a podcast episode. We actually want to have a whole conversation about this, and invite you guys in to listen to the stuff that we talk about, and bring in some of our friends." So it's just been it's something beautiful for me to be able to do with you. I love you, babe. I appreciate that we get to do this. I have the best co-host, and I'm excited.
Aww,
I'm
I
excited.
Love you too.
I love you. Sorry, guys, we're not usually this mushy, but it's just sharing on the personal side of things. This episode is a little bit to fill you in on what's going on behind the scenes, and we're excited. We're excited to continue doing what we're doing. We got a good thing going. Got some good conversations coming up. And we're thankful that you guys are tuning in and listening, and we're really touched by that and all of your support. So you can keep supporting us and keep letting us know to keep it going if you're enjoying what you're hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So our call to action for this episode is swing by the Dauntless Media Collective website, dauntless.fm. Hop into the Dauntless Media Collective Discord server. We'll put the link in the show, both links in the show notes. And then, if you want to join our Patreon, look, it's basically about the same amount as if you were to buy both of us a cup of coffee once a month. So think about it that way. You're buying us a cup of coffee or a cheap beer once a month.
That's nice. We're thankful.
Yeah.
Very appreciative.
Yeah, we're very thankful. We're very, very thankful for those of you buying us coffee and beer. Okay, I think on that note, we'll go ahead and bid everyone adieu.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much. We appreciate and love you guys.
All righty. Catch you all in the next one.